need to make a quick exit. I always think that's funny. It's like people talking in the kitchen at a party, how we speak up our comfort zones. I'm Marianne Williamson, which you probably already know. And you probably also know that I am running for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States. I'm sure you know that tomorrow is voting day. Thank you for wearing the buttons. And you probably also know that as of tomorrow, President Biden will probably have this nomination shown up. He needs about 400 or 500 more delegates. I have no delegates yet, although we have almost 400,000, almost 300,000 votes so far. No delegates, so you might say, why is she still doing this? And I'll tell you why I'm doing this, and why I hope that if you do feel that what you hear today aligns with your thoughts about the country, your feelings about where we are and where things should go, I hope you will vote for me, because to the extent that I can stay in the conversation, then there's a potential of the things I talk about here today having influence. Influence at the convention, influence on the conversation, possibly influence on the platform, and even influence on the president. So I just want to set that context for what we're doing here. I think it's very, very important what we're talking about here, because let me just say up front that I think it would be very dangerous for our democracy if Donald Trump becomes president again. Now, a lot of people had said to me from the beginning of my campaign, why are you doing this, Marianne? Don't you realize that fascists are at the door? So I want you to know that I'm doing this because fascists are at the door. I do not believe that the campaign that the Democrats are mounting at this moment, I don't think that campaign stands a good chance, according to the polls and according to many other factors that I think most of us are probably already familiar with. At a deeper level, I agree with Franklin Roosevelt, who said that we would not have to worry about a fascist takeover in the United States as long as democracy delivers on its promises. To me, the fascists should never have gotten this close to the door. The fact they did means something's wrong. And what is wrong is that democracy has not been delivering on its promises. What does that mean? Well, it would mean that we would have in this country what they have in every other advanced democracy, such as universal health care. We could have Medicare for all in this country. Many people would say to you, oh, but you have to understand how complicated it is. I'm saying to you, it's not complicated, it's corrupt. 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. 68,000 Americans die every year from lack of health care. We have 18 million Americans who cannot afford the prescriptions that their doctors give them. 75 to 90 million are either underinsured or uninsured, right? Now let's talk about what that underinsured means. Even for people who have medical insurance in this country today, millions of people have coverage for the doctor's visit. But the coverage doesn't extend to the tests that the doctor wants to run. It doesn't extend to any operation the doctor might feel is absolutely necessary. And for 18 million Americans, the coverage does not go towards the prescriptions that the doctors give them. So we have been trained to expect too little in this country. The American people being given much less than the citizens in other advanced democracies has become the new normal. We should have improved Medicare for all. That would mean including eyeglasses, including hearing aids, and including dental, and including mental health care. Now, why don't we? Why don't we? It's not that it's complicated. It's because of the institutional greed of the insurance companies. Why do we have 1.3 million people in this country who are rationing their insulin? Because of the institutionalized greed of the pharmaceutical companies. Why do you think we have carcinogens in our food that they don't have in other advanced democracies or even other advanced nations? I'll tell you why. Because of the institutionalized greed of big food. If big food in the United States discovers an ingredient that will increase the shelf life of a particular food they're manufacturing. That increases their stockholder value. Guess what? It also has carcinogenic elements, so that food would be forbidden in other advanced democracies. Some of you might have seen the kind of viral article that went around a few months ago about the difference in the ingredients in a ketchup bottle in the United States versus the ingredients in a ketchup bottle made by the same company in Canada. Why do you think we have chemicals and pesticides that we absolutely know harm a developing child's brain? Nothing but the institutionalized greed of the chemical companies. Why do you think we have made such damage to our farming sector, to farmers, to the lands, to the food that we produce? Because of the institutionalized greed of big agricultural companies. Why do you think guns flood our streets way beyond anything that has to do with common sense gun safety measures? Because of the institutionalized greed of the gun manufacturing industry. Why do you think that no matter who the president is, Democrat or Republican in the modern era, man, they line up with big oil? So that even now, with a president who calls himself the climate president, yes, he's done some really good investments in clean energy. Guess what else he's done? More investments in dirty energy. He has given more oil drilling permits than even Trump did, and he has okayed the Willow Project. And similarly, no matter who it is these days, Democrat or Republican, those presidents line up with the military-industrial complex and the incredible institutionalized greed there. Now, I'd like to point out something. I didn't just tell you anything we don't all know. I might have told you a specific statistic or something that you might not have been aware of, but we all know this. We've been trained. We've been trained to just accept too little. We've been trained. It's so interesting. I'm sure there are all kinds of people in this room who would say, oh, I don't stand for an abusive relationship. I don't stand for a toxic relationship. I set a boundary when I need to set a boundary. Well, isn't it time to set a boundary with people who are putting carcinogens in our food? Isn't it time to set a boundary with those who are enabling big oil to continue to poison our environment in such a way that any children or grandchildren that we might one day have aren't even guaranteed a reasonable chance of survival on this planet? And since I'm at Georgia Tech, and there are young people here, I want to know if there's anybody in this room who is either a young person who has said, or an older person who has heard a younger person say the following words. And if that's the case, please put your hand up high and keep it there, because I want everybody to be able to see, okay? The words are the following. Under normal circumstances, I'm at a point of my life where I might be thinking about having children. But given the state of the environment and the state of the world, I'm not sure it would be a moral thing to do. I'm not sure it would be a responsible thing to do. How many of you have either said it or heard it?
Oh, that's me.
Please keep your hands up. Put your hands up high, please. I want everybody. Okay, and now with your hands up high, I'd like everybody to just look around the room, please. This, thank you, is not normal. This is not normal. This is like a species starting to shut down. We're like the frogs in the boiling water. And we have a political establishment that continues to tell us, no, it's not too hot. Our political establishment says, we'll tone it down a little, we'll turn it down a little. So one major political party is just a nosedive, and the other one is a managed decline. One is saying we're headed straight for the iceberg, the other is saying we're headed there more slowly, and we will hit the iceberg at a different level. I'm saying, no, we have to turn this ship around. And I am a lifelong Democrat. I grew up at a time when you could count more or less on the Democratic Party to be the conduit for unequivocal advocacy for the working people of the United States. Now, everything that I mentioned to you, represented by this matrix of corporate powers, insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, big chemical, big food, big ag, gun manufacturers, big oil, defense contractors. The issue is
for the people who represent the stockholder class of those industries and the CEO class and the people who are making, literally in many cases, billions of dollars off those profits, everything's fine. And that's who our politicians are playing to. Our politicians, in case after case, are doing more to serve the short-term profit maximization of their donors than to serve your safety, your health, and your well-being. Now, this is interesting for me. You know, I'm up here, look at me. I'm a boomer woman, look at my affect. I'm kind of on a sort of social level, a fairly moderate person. What I'm saying, we've been told that the stuff I'm talking about is some radical left-wing socialist agenda. Everything I am saying is considered a moderate position in every other advanced democracy. We have just been trained to expect too little. We've been trained to accept this. We have been trained to accept institutional abuse of a nature that we would never accept in our personal lives. And that's because in our personal lives, we all get down, we get real, we talk about therapy, we talk about who's in an abusive relationship and who's in a toxic relationship and who simply has to set a boundary. Oh, when it comes to our personal relationships, we're all over it. But when we get together to talk about these hugely important global issues, not only that will affect us personally, no matter whether we like it or not, but which will also affect the rest of the world, we've been trained to think like sixth graders. We've been trained to farm out our best thinking. We've been trained to farm out our own critical thought processes. And we are told more and more, and I think this year is a perfect example. It's like the Soviet Union or something. You can vote for whoever you want, but we're going to tell you who your choices are. And I'm here to tell you that they have a way of making sure that anybody that they don't want in the conversation, which means anyone who does not support their corporatist agenda, is not even in the conversation. I mean, how many of you have been told I'm a crystal lady? Woo-woo, right? Not a serious candidate. Now, I'd like to take on that not serious, she's an unserious candidate. I defy you to find another candidate who's been as serious in conversations as I've just been with you over the last 15 minutes. I'm the one having the serious conversation, and by the way, they know that. They call me unserious because they know how serious I am. Now, last time I was on CNN, I had a CNN town hall. I was on MSNBC fairly regularly. And if you're a Democratic voter in the United States, if you don't see someone on CNN, if you don't see them on MSNBC, you don't even think that they're running. Oh, that was purposeful. I was thrown off ballots. I was blocked from appearing places. I'm a big girl. I can handle it. I have a life. But this is bigger than me. This is not good for our democracy. The traditional role of any political party is to stand in the background and let the people decide. You're voting tomorrow. The people are supposed to choose the nominee, and at that point, the political party is supposed to come forward. Ever since 2016, the DNC, it's like we're going back to Tammany Hall politics, a bunch of men sitting around a table smoking cigars, and they're going to decide who the nominees are. And that is why I'm still in the race. Because it is very important, as Martin Luther King said, your life begins to end on the day you stop talking about the things that matter. And I believe that the things we're talking about matter. After the Battle of Gettysburg, once the Battle of Gettysburg was fought, it was clear that the North was going to win the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln showed up at the battlefield, as we all know, and he referred to the men who had died for the North. Sorry, God. And he said that the men who had died so that, the way he described it, he said they had given their last full measure of devotion. So that a government of the people, by the people, and for the people would not perish from the earth. I'm here talking to you today because it's perishing now. It's perishing now. It's perishing on our watch. We are not, for all intents and purposes, a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. We are a government of the corporations, by the corporations, and for the corporations. Their short-term profits come before your safety, your health, and your well-being, which means that we are not a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And there is this PR narrative that is exceedingly strong, which has pulled the wool over the eyes of millions of Americans, that for the government to do anything that actually serves people is somehow socialist. To that crowd, Abraham Lincoln would be seen as a communist. So what Franklin Roosevelt said, who was my political hero in many ways, is that it is the purpose of government. Where do you think their money comes from except your tax dollars? It's your money, your money. So I'm going to say something now that for those of you who are young, you'll intellectually know that what I'm saying is true, but it still is going to sound to you perhaps like a fairy tale, okay? And to those of you who are older, you're going to say, oh, it's true. Okay, you ready? I'm going to talk to you about a land long ago and far away. Are you ready? It was called the 1970s. And I want to describe it to you, okay? The average American couple could afford a house. The average American couple could afford a car. The average American couple could afford a yearly vacation. The average American couple could afford for one parent to stay home with the kids if they wanted to. Why? Because one salary supported a family of 4. And that couple could afford to send not only their one child, but all of their kids to college. Gee, what do you think happened? Do you think it just happened that we have instead now 39% of the American people who report that they regularly skip meals in order to pay their rent? Do you think it just happened that we now are in a country where half of our renters cannot really afford their rent? Where housing is such a crisis that so many young people can't even get their lives started like they could in my generation, but instead have to stay home with their parents long past the time when either they or their parents expected that to be the case, when parents are having to spend the money that they thought would be their retirement money to help their kids, making it harder and harder for everyone? Do you think it just happened that the majority of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck, or that the majority of Americans cannot afford a $1,000 unexpected expenditure? Do you think that just came out of nowhere? It did not come out of nowhere. It came out of a very specific economic paradigm that now holds Washington hostage. It is the very idea that corporate profits rather than humanitarian democratic values should be the organizing principle of our society. And because of that, there has been a $50 trillion transfer of wealth from the bottom 90% to the top 1% of Americans. And this is where we are now. If you are in the top 20% of earners in this country, things are going well. And that is to be celebrated. I'm not putting that down. You know, this is not, the problem is not that some people can get rich in America. That's a good thing. The problem is that the vast majority of people never get a shot at it. And that's the point of the American dream, that anybody, if they work hard enough, should have a shot. And millions of American children not only never get a shot, they're locked out by the time they're 10 years old. Because if a child cannot learn to read by the time they're 8, 10 at the maximum, their chances of high school graduation are drastically decreased, and their chances of incarceration are drastically increased. Now, I want to say something to those of you who are students here. You'll be fine. The system is designed to make sure that you'll be fine, because they pick out the best and the brightest to run the thing. And then if you, 20, 30 years from now, say, I think that the income inequality is not moral and is even unsustainable, the system would say to you, well, what are you complaining about? You're doing fine. It's designed to make you to forget. The American dream isn't just that you can make it. The American dream is that anybody has a shot. That's the point. That's the point of the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is our North Star. It is our mission statement. In the Jewish religion, it says, that every generation must rediscover God for itself. And I think in this country, every generation has to rediscover for ourselves the meaning of the words in the Declaration of Independence. If they are only inscribed on marble walls or on parchment under glass, but no longer inscribed in our hearts, and you have that happen for more than, let's say, a couple generations, they lose their moral force. They're real, but they're not really real anymore. And let me tell you what happens when those words are no longer real for us. We become easy to play. And that's what's happened here. We've been played. So the issue is for us to, as John Adams said, he hoped that every July 4th we would revisit those principles. Let's talk about the story of America. In your national life, just like in your individual life, you go to therapy or whatever, and you start investigating your family of origins, the history of your people, you start knowing much more. Your color, your ethnicity, your sex, your sexuality. You start learning the history, and it gives you a much greater sense of who you are, your identity, who you came from, what you owe your ancestors, and what you owe your descendants. But we also have to do that as Americans. And when we have a deeper understanding of the American story, we understand what's happening in this generation, and what our rights are, but every bit as importantly, our sacred responsibility. So let's go back to the beginning. 56 men, and they were very brave men. They were very brave, I say, because if the British had won the war, they would all have been hanged. They would have been executed as traitors against the King of England. And they signed a document, and by so signing, they did change the world. By so signing, they infused into the birth of a nation principles which repudiated centuries and longer of social, economic, and political systems which exalted a few at the expense of the many. When I was a child, I remember learning about the divine right of kings. Anybody remember that? I remember that. Divine right of kings, right? Well, all of a sudden, here comes a document that says, no, the divine right of everyone. That was radical in 1776, and it's also radical today. All men are created equal. Then it goes on to say that all are created with inalienable rights, can't take them away, of life, of liberty, and of the pursuit of happiness, which I think in today's language would be like self-actualization. You have the right. Go do what you want to do, spread your wings, fly high, do whatever, make it happen, and as long as you don't hurt anyone else, that's your right. Radical. Then it gets even more radical. It says that government is instituted to secure those rights. Not limit those rights, not undercut those rights, not thwart those rights, to secure those rights. And then the last principle is more radical than any of them. And that's that if that government is not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. That's where it started. But that also is where it got very gnarly. None of us are stupid. We understand that out of those 56 men, 41 of them were slave owners. Now that's America's DNA. That's the American story right there. We are and we have always been both and. From the beginning, the characterological, almost bipolarity of the American mind. It was with us at the beginning, and it is reiterated in every generation, even unto ours. This is significant because you begin to understand we're not going through anything our ancestors didn't go through. This is the same stuff that comes back and comes back and comes back and comes back. It is this story that these amazing principles of social enlightenment exist. They are the principles on which we purport to stand, and there are people in every generation, including ours, who get that and are willing to lay claim to those principles in our personal lives and in our national life. People who are willing to struggle for those principles, to sacrifice for those principles, and in some cases to die for them. But we have also been from the very beginning, even unto now, generations that are also filled with forces representing those who for their own ideological and or financial purposes have no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles made manifest. It is inconvenient to their financial or ideological purposes, and they have proven over and over again that they will do whatever it takes to make sure that they are not. That's how it goes down in this country. That's our struggle. It is inherent in who we are. Okay, you get that, and you go, well, how have other generations handled it? Well, you look at how other generations have handled it, and you go, actually, there's a lot to be very impressed by.
Because other generations responded to slavery with abolition and with the Civil War. Other generations responded to the institutionalized suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement and the passage of the 19th Amendment. Other generations responded to the financial unfairness of the Gilded Age with the establishment of the organized labor movement. And other generations responded to segregation and the institutionalized suppression of Black people in the American South with the Civil Rights Movement. In other words, we're not going through anything we haven't gone through in this country before, and I'm standing in front of you now with one message. It's our turn now. Now, those situations were what you might think of as excisable tumors. You have slavery, we know we have to do, abolish it. You have suppression of women, we know what we have to do, give women the right to vote. We have the kind of financial inequities of the Gilded Age, we knew what we had to do, establish organized labor. You have segregation, we knew what we had to do, we had to desegregate, pass the Voting Rights Act, pass the Civil Rights Act, and so forth. Today, it's not one particular institutional reality. Today, it's an economic paradigm that has infused itself into everything, into every corner of our society, including college loan debts. I'm not going to ask you guys, I'm going to raise your hand if you have a college loan debt, but I know tens of millions do. I want you to know that before the 1960s, we had systems of tuition-free college and tech school. We had University of California, University of Texas, University of Florida. I think one of the reasons there's such an intergenerational connection right now between those of us who are older and those who are younger is because we remember. It's like, what's going on here? So we agree with you. People in the middle, they don't have the memory. They were brought up at a time when these things weren't here. Those of us who are older say, what's going on here? You have every right to be upset. It wasn't hard for us the way it's hard for you. And so at this point, especially since the Citizens United decision 14 years ago on the part of the Supreme Court, these corporate entities have been given unlimited permission to influence Washington. So they have turned Washington, D.C. itself into a system of legalized bribery. And that's the new status quo. Like I said, policy after policy, issue after issue. They do more to serve their profits of their donors than to serve you. And that's why they don't, so the political parties, now, George Washington, remember, political parties are not mentioned in our Constitution. And George Washington, in his farewell address, warned us. He said that he was afraid political parties would form factions of men more loyal to their party than to their country. And that's exactly what has happened. John Adams also said he thought it was the biggest threat to democracy. So now, not only do the major political parties chop wood and carry water for these huge, this matrix of corporate powers that I've mentioned, they are corporate powers. And that is why they do whatever it takes to keep anyone out of the conversation who is talking about things like I'm talking about now, which, as I said, not only are considered moderate positions in every other advanced democracy, but it's even more than that. The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, not as big a majority, but a majority, want Medicare for all. A majority of Republicans as well as Democrats, not as big a majority, but still a majority, want tuition-free college and tech school. A majority of Americans, Republicans as well as Democrats, including gun owners, want more common sense gun safety legislation. So why don't we have those things?
because those corporate powers are in charge and we're not. Now, some of you might be thinking, it's all locked up, there's nothing we can do. Now, I'm talking to you from the belly of the beast. So however locked up you might think it is, oh, you're so right. It's probably even more locked up than you know. However, what did our ancestors do? You think the abolitionists didn't think slavery had it all locked up? They unlocked it. The women's suffragists, you think that the institutional suppression of women that had gone on had never been any different since the inception of this country, didn't have it all locked up? Yeah, it had it all locked up. They unlocked it. And so did the civil rights movement, and so did the early labor organizers. Let's not be the first generation to wimp out and not put this country back on track when systematic forces of injustice and lack of democracy are assaulting everything this country is supposed to be. You know, some things you don't do because you are guaranteed success. You do it because it is the right thing to do. So I'm running because, having experienced all the shenanigans, you have no idea how rigged our system is. It is rigged so that only those with huge amounts of money, and I don't just mean a lot of money, I mean a lot of it. The president has $1 billion to spend. So it is designed so only those with huge amounts of money can get anywhere near the pinnacles of power. Now, you might ask yourself about so many things that are wrong in America, why aren't they fixed? Well, if you look at who's making the laws, you begin to understand. So at this point, there's only one way to disrupt this, because the status quo that I've described to you has no intention of disrupting itself. The only way we can disrupt it is through a massive, nonviolent march on the voting box. That's the one place. That's why they work so hard to keep somebody off a ballot. That's why they work so hard to block someone like myself. Not because they think I'm unserious, but because they know that this is the message that speaks to so many of the needs of the American people. You have 39% of Americans, once again, that are regularly skipping meals to pay their rent, and we're not even going to talk about that in a presidential campaign. What does that tell you? It means that that fact and that level of ubiquitous chronic economic anxiety, it's a feature, it's not a bug. The way capitalism operates today is a malevolent strain of unfettered capitalism, completely devoid of any moral center. It is predicated on the existence of a permanent underclass. That's not going to change if we just continue to vote for these people. It's not. And yet, obviously, we have a real conundrum on our hands, those of us who know that it's important that Donald Trump not return to the White House because of the risks involved in third party and so forth, which is why I'm running as a Democrat. So if I'm president, what I think we need is something that was phrased, a phrase that was coined by Franklin Roosevelt, what he wanted, an economic bill of rights. Because it's not enough to just tweak things here or tweak things there. We are so fundamentally off course. Eleanor Roosevelt said to her husband, we need more than the amelioration of stress. We need fundamental economic reform. That's what the corporatist Democrats represent. I mean, the Republican, the party the way it exists now, they don't even pretend to care. Actually, they do pretend to care, but their policies to any thinking person are the opposite of that which will address the root causes of these problems. The Democratic establishment corporatists, what they will do, they will try to ameliorate the stress, but they will go only up to a certain point. They will stop at any point past which to do so would actually challenge the economic bottom line of their major donors. So, and the people who supposedly represent the progressives are so lined up with the DNC just waiting for their turn and all of that stuff that we all know that we don't even need to discuss here. Were I president, we'd have an economic bill of rights. It has to include all those things for fundamental economic reform. Universal health care in the form of a Medicare for all plan, such as I mentioned to you, tuition-free college and tech school, which, as I already told you, we had until the 1960s, complete eradication of the college loan debt using the higher education bill. subsidized childcare, which is a crisis. Childcare is such a crisis for millions of Americans. Universal paid family leave, guaranteed affordable housing. We need 10 to 20 million units of social housing. We need guaranteed sick pay and a guaranteed living wage. We've not lifted the minimum wage since 2009, $7.25 an hour. In any major city in the United States, I assume this includes Atlanta, living wage is over $20 an hour. We have 1/3 of America's workers living on less than $15 an hour, and half of them cannot find a place to live. There is ubiquitous chronic anxiety in this country. 70% of Americans say they live with chronic economic anxiety, and then that system, which is at the cause of that economic anxiety, has the audacity to call it a mental health crisis, thereby displacing any sense of responsibility. You know, I have had a long career working with people whose lives are in crisis. That's what has brought me here. But when my career began in the 1980s, began during the AIDS crisis, and I feel that I feel very privileged. I feel very blessed that so many people have let me into their lives at some of their darkest hours. Whether it was the test results came back, it's cancer, it's AIDS, someone you love suddenly died, or a child is on heroin and you didn't know it, or bankruptcy and you didn't know, whatever it is. But when my career began, the vast majority of people that I spoke to, and America itself at that time, the crisis was the exception and not the rule. What I began to experience around the year 2000, late 90s, early 2000s, is how many Americans live in a state where the crisis is the rule and not the exception. And now we live in a country where the crisis is the rule and not the exception. We're in a permanent state of crisis. There's always something. It's an environmental crisis, or it's a crisis of our democracy, or it's a health crisis. The whole thing is just a crisis. And we're supposed to believe if we just tweak it a little bit here and tweak it a little bit there. We've all just become normalized to the state of crisis. And then we're taught to blame each other, people on the left, blaming people on the right, people on the right, blaming people on the left, which is also an artificially created dichotomy. Because the real problem is it's one of those don't look up things. The real dichotomy is between the powerful and the powerless. Between those who have capital and access to more capital versus those who are just struggling to get by. Now, this is not personal. Not every rich person in America is a greedy bastard. Not by a long shot. This is not about individuals. This is about systems that need to be held to account. And the only way to hold it to account is for us. And that's what the Declaration of Independence says. And I have to tell you something else. We let this happen. We did. The American people have not had our eyes on the ball. And we've been played. Now, some of you are so young, you're thinking, what are you talking about? This is my first time to vote. So maybe I'm not speaking about you, but some of us know how true it is. That's what we need. We need that economic Bill of Rights, and we need more. We must repudiate America's forever war machine. I live in Washington, D.C. It's called there the blob. And as I said before, no matter if it's Democrat or Republican, those presidents fall in line with the military-industrial complex. And we now have, it's unbelievable, it was $800 billion or something like that for the budget this year. I saw it written that they're planning on $1.5 trillion next year. Nobody here needs to be reminded of all the military misadventures that have been carried out by the military-industrial complex, including 1 million people who died in Iraq when we invaded that country, and it had done nothing to us in 9/11. We do these things because as much of a spectacular failure as they are, that plus the last 20 years in Afghanistan, it was a boon. It was a big success. The defense contractors and the stockholders at places like Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and Raytheon. We also need to ramp down, not ramp up fossil fuel extraction, which we are continuing to do, even if it means to declare a climate emergency, which I would be willing to do. We need a mass mobilization for a just transition from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We also need a just transition from a war economy to a peace economy. One of the ways we need to do that is by learning how to wage peace. We need a Department of Peace. We need a peace academy, just like we have a military academy. We need an army of peace builders, just like we have an army of military personnel. We need to play peace games, not just war games. We need to be as sophisticated in the ways we strategize for peace as we are in the ways that we strategize for war. John F. Kennedy said that if mankind does not get rid of war, war will get rid of mankind. And I can't imagine any intelligent person looking at the situation on the planet today not being deeply concerned that we could be headed for disaster. One last policy issue I'd like to mention to you. Well, actually, there are two. I do think it's time to pay reparations for slavery. The reason I say that is because I believe that in the life of a nation, just as in the life of an individual, you can't have the future that you want if you are not willing to clean up the past. After the United States recognized the wrong-mindedness of the Japanese internment camps during World War II, those who had survived the camps did receive $22,000 each. After World War II, Germany did pay $89 billion to Jewish organizations. By the middle of the 20th century, it was accepted that if one people has transgressed against another people, that financial remuneration makes sense. If the wage gap between black and white Americans was closed, our economy would be $1.5 trillion larger. There is no loss to anyone. There is gain to everyone. You know, Martin Luther King used to say, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. The opposite is true as well. Justice to anyone brings greater justice to everyone. And I do have a plan for reparations. That is if you go to Marianne2024.com and you see the issues pages, you will see that. We could talk about it more if you like. One other issue that I want to bring up before we then talk about whatever you want to talk about. It is time to end America's war on drugs. So I'd like to talk to you about that for a moment. The war on drugs was begun in 1971 by Richard Nixon, President Richard Nixon. Some of us here remember him. And he initiated it saying that drugs were public enemy number one. President Nixon had an aide, he had several aides who went to prison. They went to prison because of the Watergate scandal. And one of them was a man named John Ehrlichman. And when John Ehrlichman came out of prison, he spilled the beans about a lot of things. And one of them was Richard Nixon's mindset when he established the war on drugs. He did this absolutely knowing that drugs was not at that time public enemy number one, and he did it in part as an attack on black communities. We had spent $1 trillion. Clearly, it has not solved the problem. It has exacerbated the problem, including fueling the prison industrial complex. When I was in college, there were 300,000 people in prison in the United States, and today there are 2.3 million. 46% of all federal prisoners are nonviolent drug offenders, most of whom should be home with raising their children. So this is what you do. You head towards decriminalization. Now, places like Oregon tried to do this unsuccessfully, but that's because they didn't do it wisely. You need to have harm reduction. We need to treat drug addiction not as a criminal issue as we do now, but as a health issue, as countries such as Portugal do. Also, there's a tremendous racial element in this. Black Americans and white Americans use drugs at roughly the same rate. But you don't hear about police people raiding white neighborhoods to look for drugs. We know, in addition to that, we know that when black people of color are sentenced for any criminal issue, they are liable to get 20% longer as a punishment, 20% longer in prison. So all of this does just feeds the injustices, criminal injustices, racial injustices, and of course the size of the prison industrial complex. We now spend $100 billion a year on the drug war. We could, you end that, get a fraction of that could be used to fund a world-class network of drug recovery options. There are people in this country, whether it comes to drug addiction, whether it comes to agriculture, regenerative agriculture, whether it has to do with health, whether it has to do with energy, I don't care what the issue is. We have the problem solvers. The problem is not the American people. The problem is a sclerotic political system that acts like a lid on top of it, so that the genius and the sort of regenerative attitude, which is the spirit of this country, can't make itself manifest in our collective experience. So what we have is the problem solvers over here, and those with power over here. And those who know how to solve the problems don't have the power. And those who have the power too often don't really want to hear from those who can solve the problems, because those problem-solving modalities do not serve the corporate lines, bottom line of their donor class. Also, I do want to say one more thing about that. You know, that means I wouldn't want a drug czar. I would want a recovery czar. Most addicts would like to recover, right? And the other issue about that I'll mention before I stop and open it up to you, this will help us on the southern border, because we have to address what's happening on the southern border on the level of root cause and not just symptom. Those root causes have to do with economic desperation, and if we look at the economic desperation due to the destabilization of so many of those Latin American economies, America's fingerprints are all over it. Because our foreign policy in Latin America over the last 50 years has in many cases actually contributed to that destabilization, and I think we should act more to restabilize. Right now we give something like $200 million in humanitarian aid to Latin American countries at this time. That will include, by the way, of course, we should remove the sanctions on Venezuela as well as on Cuba. But the other issue that drives so many people to immigrate out of desperation to this country has to do with the violence that is perpetrated by the drug cartels. As we decriminalize and end the drug war, we'll remove their black market. We'll remove their black market. It won't stop them completely, but it will put a major dent in it. So I think what you can hear from everything that I've said so far is that the agenda of my campaign represents an actual turnaround. We can't keep, I don't care if you're going straight for the iceberg, which could take many forms, or you're headed there at a different angle a little more slowly. We have to turn this thing around. I'm only running for one term. And I'm only running for one term because the kind of exercise of authority given to the chief executive, which I would have as president, the kinds of changes I want to try to effectuate, such as I mentioned to you here today, no president could accomplish if even thinking about the possibility of getting re-elected. And number two, because I'm 71 years old and I don't think a baby boomer should be president in 2028. So take me now. So this is the moment. I don't think we have time for me. And as I said before, I have a lot of deep concerns about the campaign that the Democrats are planning to wage. I know the Democratic establishment apparently thinks if they just raise enough money and have enough TV ads, if they just close their eyes and cross their fingers, they'll be able to beat Trump. I personally think this is going to be a lot more like 2016 than it is going to be like 2020. And people are in complete denial to just ignore what the polls are saying about Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, and so forth. If all I can do is be able to contribute to the conversation enough that any of the issues that I'm talking about would make their way to the platform or even into the president's thinking, then it is worth it to me to do this, to stay in. And I hope, if you agree with me, that you will vote for me tomorrow and that you will help me get other people to vote for me tomorrow. Because with every vote I get, I move closer to inconveniencing some people in this country who deeply deserve to be inconvenienced. Thank
Hell
you.
yeah.
Okay. Now, anything you want to ask, anything you want to talk about, anything you want to share with the group, who would like to go first? Yes, sir.
Hi, good to see you. Didn't
Hey,
I meet you in
yeah.
New Hampshire?
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing memory you have.
Well,
I'm very
look at
honored.
that.
I'm very honored to remember. Yeah, I think this is my fourth event
Ah, I
at
didn't
this
know
point.
That. I didn't
Yeah.
remember New Hampshire.
Yeah, so I've been around. So I liked what you had to say about reforming the criminal justice system, and it's fresh in my mind because I was following you down here to Georgia. I'm from New York City, and I spent about 16 hours in the slammer for smoking cannabis outside my hotel room. And one of the complications also, and I'm lucky I had parents with the resources to figure it out, was trying to figure out the cash bail system. So would you also be interested in potentially ending cash bail nationwide?
Of course it should be ended. And also, one of the first things I would do is deschedule marijuana from a Schedule I drug. As you know, as I already said, I want to get rid of the entire war on drugs, but this thing with marijuana is absurd. And this is, again, the president, it's incremental change. He said, I'm going to talk to my people about a plan. No, you do it. You actually, it is so much easier for the president to do things than they present it as. Oh, it's so complicated. Some of these things are actually not complicated. The president could also call up the archivist and demand that there is a publishing of the ERA like in a minute. Right, which right there would mean that women would not make less than men. So absolutely deschedule marijuana. Let everyone who is, there are people in prison for marijuana, and not only should they be let out, but they should also their record should be expunged. This is an example. What are we doing? This is 2024. This is not 1987. And yet the political system is stuck in 1987. And we are continuing to accept this. That's the real problem here, is that we're accepting it. Does that make sense? And you said you were lucky you had the resources, and
Yep.
you're white. And
Systemic racism, right, right.
Okay, yes, sir.
Hey, I appreciate everything you're talking about, everything you're doing. I met you actually in South Carolina, in Taylor's. You met
Oh, nice.
myself, my little son, my baby.
Now, where do you live? Do you live there or here?
I live here.
Okay.
I live here, yeah. I love your ideas. I love your thought process. You know, my question is, and my problem is, a lot of times I feel very powerless, right? I know everything that's going on. I'm watching it to the point where I try to stay away from watching it. I almost don't want to be informed because I feel like I can't make much of a change. Now, for someone who's working, let's say 60, 70 hours a week, how does that person help? Any ideas?
When you have somebody like me, vote for them. When you have somebody who's willing to take their stuff, you vote for me. And you get on the phone and you talk to people that you know, and you get on your text and you say, you really ought to look at Marianne2024.com and say, look at her issues. Because right now, if people aren't even trying, so people have this idea that we're powerless, but we're really not once we pierce the illusion. It's an illusion of powerlessness. They want you to feel powerless. They want you to feel powerless. First of all, even what you just said about how many hours you're working, it's a way to numb people. It's a way to make sure the fact that for so many million Americans there's no wiggle room economically, that is one of the ways that you don't have the bandwidth. You got your spouse, you got your partner, you got your children, nobody has time to go to PTA meeting, nobody has time to care about these things. It's not strategized by people who are consciously thinking this necessarily, but it's the unconscious way that the mind operates when it's not there for love. And so this is what, my father, when I was a child, my father used to walk around the house, beat the system, kids, beat the system. I was about 15 years old. I called my brother. I said, I think Daddy meant that. And my brother said, absolutely, he meant that. And otherwise, a friend of mine put it, he said, I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees. And there are, I understand why it feels locked up, because it is locked up, but other generations unlocked it. Think how people felt during abolition. Think how people felt during the women's suffrage movement. Think how people felt during early labor organizing. Think how people felt during the civil rights movement. But as I said earlier, I think you might have come in a little bit late, did you? Yeah. Some things you do not because there's a guarantee of success, but so that you can look in the mirror and have respect for yourself. and look at your kids and be able to know at the end of the day, I tried. I tried. You know, that's how I feel about if Trump wins. I tried. You have an option. You have an option.
Yeah, the alternative.
As long as I'm running, you have an option. You can't say you didn't have an option. It's a change in us. You know, Martin Luther King said we need external changes in our circumstances and internal shifts in our souls. They don't need to have external chains on us if they have internal chains on us. We're shackled internally. And that's as much of an issue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
How are you? I have two questions really, so I'm just gonna go ahead and get them both out there and then you can answer me one. As far as the cartel, as far as like the drug issues, yes, the drug war, I feel like we started a war on terror back in 2001. We started a war on terror back in 2001, and I believe that the cartels are terrorist organizations and that they're not halfway across the world, but they're right here. And so it's my opinion that we should just be having a war on terror against these people that are attacking us. So yes, do your decriminalization, but a lot of these things shouldn't just be decriminalized. They're actually dangerous. And their programs should be teaching people what these do to you and not just say no, and know how this is gonna affect your life. And I think that we have terrorist organizations at our doorstep and infiltrating our country. What should we do about that? And then my second question is, what's your take on AI and it taking all of our jobs?
Okay. All right. When Nikki Haley was running, Nikki Haley was saying we need to go into Mexico.
Invade, right?
Mexico militarily
Start a
and
war.
take on these terrorists, these cartels. How did it work with the Taliban? How did we do? But you
Made it
really
worse?
think that we can just use brute force? We're not even successful at it. And we're talking about the next one? Oh, we're gonna just go in Mexico. So don't you come in here and do that. And then so what? We're gonna have more militarization of the police? You don't think Cop City is bad enough? Excuse me. I suggest that what we do, as I said before, let's take away their market. We created, the drug war has created their market. Now, there's one drug about which I totally agree with you, and we have to go full force, but ending the drug war will really actually give us more bandwidth and resources with which to do that, and that is fentanyl. There is no doubt about it when it comes to fentanyl. But with some of these others, we should treat it the way, when you look at a country like Portugal, they have a better rate. Just criminalizing drug addiction is not working. And if you get rid of the drug cartel, you start killing, I mean, look, they try to come out after a lot of these guys. With some of them, they're successful. Some of them are put in prison. Some of them are handled. But my God, it's now 2024. We've been at this since 1971. It's not working doing it that way. So one of the things that we can do, take away the appetite. Most addicts do not wish to be addicts. I think we definitely need more education along the line of what you said. We definitely do. And that's why when certain celebrities tell the truth, it's very helpful, actually. And every time a celebrity dies tragically from a drug overdose, you do get a sense that some of the young people go, whoa. You know what I'm saying? We do need to do much more of that. But this idea of we're going to use this idea that Americans have, that if we just build more prisons and drop more bombs, that we can handle these problems, it's a symptom. So I say, let's end the drug war. Let's, listen, at a certain point, take heroin. Heroin is someone who is taking heroin is only hurting themselves. More crime is created because of what they'll do to get it. The thievery, etc. So other countries just say, help people get sober if they want to get sober. And you say these things are dangerous at a certain point, so are a lot of things are dangerous. And adults have to be responsible. And I think more than anything, it's not working. You know, unless you want to go with the Nikki Haley thing that we're gonna, yeah. And then do you really want the police storming in here right now? We might know somebody who's working. It's just not the way we do it in America. Now, as far as AI is concerned, I'm more concerned about AI. So we all know, first of all, it's here. It's not going away. So let's start the conversation from there. Number two, we also know the very positive aspects and potential of AI. There's no doubt about that as well. But I think people are becoming understandably, increasingly concerned about the negative repercussions. Not only in terms of the economy, taking away almost anybody's job here is potentially taken away by it. And, Andrew Yang wrote a book called War on Normal People. It's really a good book. It really opened my eyes in ways that I hadn't been, but which I've seen even since I read that book 3 years ago. It's really true. He says, oh, you think your job couldn't be taken away? I mean, it's amazing. However, my deeper concern, and I think everybody's these days, is it could subjugate the human race. I mean, you ask some of those AI programs, are you taking over the human race? And they give answers like, well, we can't do it yet, but we're on our way. Or do you know what happened with the New York Times reporter a few months ago? Does everybody know that story? Okay, so a New York Times technology reporter, so obviously sophisticated about these things, is on a Meta platform, AI platform. And the man is happily married. And the man has a strong personality structure. And there's this phenomenon called hallucinations, where sometimes these programs have what they call hallucinations. They go rogue. And this program starts telling him that he really needs to leave his wife and come be with me. And this guy's like, I love my wife, and I'm a pretty strong person. And the techniques of what this program was doing and the things it was saying and this data that it had about my life to trigger me and data it had about my wife in order to, he said it was terrifying. So he took it public, right? And he printed about it in the New York Times and he went on the television shows about it and we all heard. He goes back to his computer and it pops up. Why did you do that to us? You're evil. You're evil. Okay, now, this is the most chilling thing to me of all. When the people who own Meta and whoever runs that platform were told about it, what would you do? If you were head of the company that owned that, what would you do if you heard the story that I just told you? Pardon? Thank you! That's called ethics! Hold the frickin' plug! Shut this thing down!
You got excited.
That's exactly, and you know what they said? They just made a statement like, yes, well, we're doing everything we possibly can to minimize these things, but they happen very rarely. That's the problem in America today. Pull the plug. Now, Adam Smith, who was the primary architect of free market capitalism, said that free market capitalism cannot exist outside an ethical context. This is capitalism with no moral core. You shut that thing down. This could convince somebody to commit suicide. This could, I mean, the things that could happen. Yes, sir.
There's a new program called Sora.
Pardon?
People are aware of it.
Yes.
I learned about Sora the other day. It's text to video. It's as proud as Georgia is. You know, I'm a union background actor. I can't get my union pay here in Georgia, and that's frustrating for me. But what's more frustrating is when the Teamsters aren't needed and when IATSE's not needed and no one's needed other than a couple people to sit down and write a story into a computer and it makes the whole video. It takes that happy little Georgia peach at the end of our movies and shows that says, hey, Georgia film happens. It all goes away. So I think it's terrifying, and I think it's the end of a lot of jobs. So what kind of world do we have then?
Nothing can substitute for a change inside us. Because the kind of shifts that we need to have happen, we need a season of repair. This season of repair, for those of you who are young, it's going to be your adult life. This is not anything, these things cannot be fixed in the next 4 years, the next 8 years. It's going to be a 10 to 20 year process of some real fundamental changes. And it's going to take each and every one of us. It's going to take some changes in our own characterological makeup that we realize in our own lives, whatever business we're in, whatever activity we're in, we will be called upon. Are you doing the thing which actually serves not only your own self-interest, but the society and the world at large? Or are you not, are you contracting and not caring about those things? Are you just falling into a sense of powerlessness, or are you using the power that has been given you by the Declaration of Independence, even in the face of those who would have you convinced that you have no power? I remember when I ran for president in 2020, most of the other Democratic candidates, because you travel together a lot, and it's kind of fun. Most of them were very kind to me. There were two of them who, every time they looked at me, they were like, "Who let you in here?" And I
Kamala
wanted
and
to
Pete.
say, James Madison let me in here. A little help from Susan B. You know, their idea of qualified to be president is very interesting. The founders say that in order to be president, you have to have been born here, you have to have lived here for 14 years, and you have to be at least 35. It doesn't say you have to have been a congressman, senator, governor. This whole idea of a political class and only they are qualified is their PR concoction. So their idea of qualified is someone qualified to perpetuate the system as it is. And they would have you believe that only someone who has had years of experience driving the car that drove us into this ditch
Right, and selling your soul.
should be considered qualified to drive us out of the ditch. I completely disagree with that. I reject that. In fact, if anything, I would submit to you, somebody who's been in that system too long, it should perhaps be a disqualifier at this point. Yes. And then I see you too, sir.
Thank you so much for coming to Atlanta. I'm such a fan of your work. I have a question. Obviously, I'm a Black woman, so of course my perspective is always going to be a little bit different. But what are your plans in terms of reparations, especially considering how Black people are usually used as pawns for political parties?
Well, that's certainly very true in terms of pawns for political parties. My plan is a council of Black leaders, and it would be intergenerational, because the money would be dispersed over 20 years. So these leaders, these Black leaders, would be from business, culture, art, sports, real estate, politics, religion, right? A council of Black leaders. Because I think if I owe you money, I don't get to tell you how to spend it.
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea that the money, I think it's very paternalistic for white Americans to decide what the money goes towards. That shouldn't be my decision. So it should be a council that is intergenerational, because I think the money should be dispersed over 20 years so that there's a generational handling of this. And I think there should be two major categories: educational renewal and economic renewal. Then how this group plans to do it. Maybe you're taking on gentrification, but let's look at the way these things are done now. What are we going to do about gentrification? So a common way that we might say is, oh, we're going to give some tax credits, and if a woman, an older woman, has been in that apartment for enough years, she'll have rent control. Nothing ever fundamentally changes. But if there's actual wealth, then let's say, I worked for Oprah Winfrey for a long time. I've met some Black billionaires. You have major power players, right, among the Black population in the United States, who understand we might draw a whole circle of blocks in, let's say, Greenville, and say we're going to buy all those blocks. You see, it's the difference between tweaking things and actually giving an opportunity. And that's my plan. My plan is you start negotiations at $1 trillion. Americans do need to be educated. This is dispersed over 20 years. I also understand, I certainly had Black friends who said, wait a minute, if you had 4 to 5 million people who were formerly enslaved at the end of the Civil War, and they were told they would get, every formerly enslaved family of 4 would get 40 acres and a mule, I understand this would be many trillions of dollars. However, I think it's a difference between we can actually do this and maybe get something done. And this is my feeling. And this is my feeling based on a lot of years. I started talking about this in a book I wrote in 1998. I'm not new to this topic. I have talked to all white audiences in states like Iowa, New Hampshire, places where this is not their experience to think a lot about, like you would even in a place like this, right? And I would be talking about things, and then when I bring up the subject of reparations, there's almost a sense of, I heard this about her. And then I find that if I just do a little 5 to 7 minute thumbnail sketch of either a history that they never learned in the 7th grade, or that they forgot, and you really explain the first slave ships came over in 1619, you explain about the slave trade revving up with the cotton trade in the early 1800s, about the Civil War, the end of the Civil War, the 4 to 5 million formerly enslaved, the fact that they were promised the 40 acres and a mule, the fact that almost 260 years of slavery was followed by another 100 years of institutionalized oppression of black people in the American South. You talk about the fact that other countries have done it. Germany gave Jewish organizations $89 billion after the Holocaust, and I'll tell you something. That money, that effort on the part of Germany to go full on mea culpa, there wasn't anything like, well, I didn't do it, my ancestors didn't do it. There wasn't any of that. It was everybody accepting responsibility for the karma of the nation, as it were. That has gone so far, not only towards healing the economic wounds, but healing the emotional and psychological wounds of the Holocaust. It doesn't mean the Holocaust didn't happen. It doesn't mean slavery didn't happen. But it can go far for not only the money itself, but for what it says. And I think that if Martin Luther King had lived, and for instance, Johnson or even Humphrey had been president next, I think that after the Voting Rights Act, which as we know has been gutted, and the Civil Rights Act, I think they would have gotten to that next. It was the next step. Instead, you had Nixon, Daniel Patrick Moynihan arguing for a policy of benign neglect. And then, of course, things got worse rather than better. The drug war, an example, mass incarceration, and so forth. So it's time, I believe, I think Americans were born to do great things. We were born out of a great idea. Abolition is a big move. Women's suffrage was a big move. Labor organizing was a big move. Civil rights movement was a big move. We don't do anything big and bold and incredible anymore. And that's why we're all like wilted flowers. Because we're not being called to anything great in our time. And they said, well, we can't do it. Well, no, that system we can't do it, but we the people. Because that system has us convinced that they get to decide. Abolition didn't come from a political party. Women's suffrage didn't come from a political party. It was the Abolitionist Party, the Women's Party. Social Security came from the Socialist Party. They just have this, they have us all bamboozled. Does that make sense to you? So that's my plan. And at least you get started. You call Sandy Garrity, Ta-Nehisi Coates, some of the people who've been writing about this, talking about this. You take them to Camp David for the weekend, and you say, we're going to hash this out. I would say, I ran on this, and the American people need to know I wasn't kidding, and we're going to present on Monday at least a proposal, a platform. Because this is what they're doing now. This is a perfect example of how that system operates. I lived in Detroit, and I raised my daughter there, and I had a friend named John Conyers, Congressman John Conyers. It was a real friend and mentor to me in many ways. And John Conyers wrote the H.R. 40 bill. And H.R. 40, I think this was back in the 80s, and he wrote it, and it's to do a study about the effects of slavery and the possibility of reparations. Okay. Now, President Biden says, well, I support the idea, but Congress has to do it. Well, this is how they act. I can tell you, if John Conyers were alive today, he'd be the first person to roll his eyes. We don't need another study. We don't need any more evidence. We kind of know what happened. Let's get on with it. We need a president who says, okay, we're going to put some money on the table, we're going to start negotiating, we're going to get this done in our generation. We have to think that big. Does that make sense? And by the way, I think I might have said this before. I did, but let's remember this. And this is important, I think, for white Americans to know, because I do believe that this is a moment when a president who actually exercises moral leadership could get the buy-in from Americans. If you close the wage gap between black and white Americans, we would have a $1.5 trillion larger economy.
And with certain things, just get it done. Get started. At least take the first step. And that's what's making us all feel like nothing ever changes. Because if you keep electing them, it won't. They wouldn't let Franklin Roosevelt in the party today.
Hmm.
He'd be treated like a wild
Socialist.
radical lefty. Yes, sir.
Marianne.
Oh, I'm sorry, was there somebody?
No, I just wanted to follow up because it was,
Oh, okay,
it was just,
and then I'll come back to you, I'm sorry. Yes.
no, I'm sorry, just about, it was about the same subject.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I kind of have two questions, but to follow up on reparations, I think you know that number is too low. People call it around 20 trillion. Would be a more kind of a like a basic starting point. And I only bring this up because your presidency doesn't necessarily hinge on whether your reparations plan was like not too radical and too modest tonight. So I do think it's very helpful for someone like you who can get on CNN and MSNBC.
Which I cannot.
I'm
Well,
sure
Yeah.
they might let you back in once it's wrapped up, but I'm just saying for someone who can get on certain platforms to kind of frame this in the right perspective and get people actually solving the problem as opposed to presenting a policy of people who aren't descendants of slaves may or may not vote for, but kind of what would actually be the problem. And I guess my other question would be, I'm assuming you're for the Green New Deal, and within the Green New Deal, I think there's a federal job guarantee. So I just want to know if you are in favor of federal job guarantee, and I just want to know why it doesn't get talked as much about, because separately, you have a tool that could end unemployment as we know it. And I don't even think people are aware of that aspect in the Green New Deal.
Okay, first of all,
Absolutely, people will talk about 20 trillion. You as a black man, let's say you were representing a constituency of black people. It would be your decision to make. Do you want to go with a president, or the possibility of a presidency, and support the possibility of a presidency, actually talking about something that could be done? And also, $1 trillion over 20 years, that's a lot more money than $1 trillion that we created. You gonna go with that, support that? Or are you going to wait, I guess, until a president who says, yes, it's gotta be 20 trillion? Now, I will tell you this, with every generation that passes, you're gonna have less rather than more interest. Because you're further and further away from people who remember enough or have enough of an institutional memory to see it. So it's really a decision to be made more by you than by me. $20 trillion, in my estimation, I can only go with my estimation, is not gonna happen. And I believe that if I were president, I actually believe that I could go talk to the American people. And by the way, like any other negotiation, I said you throw $1 trillion on the table. And then you negotiate. But it's like if somebody offers you money for your house. Do you feel there's negotiation, or are they so low you're just walking away? It's good for you to decide.
I already voted for you, so it's not on.
Thank you. But I do understand that argument, but I'm really running as someone, I don't want a performative, symbolic thing. Yeah.
I'm saying from a standpoint of,
You're already setting your offer at $1 trillion when nobody's made a counteroffer, so you're not arguing down from 20 trillion, you're arguing down from 1 trillion. And I'm saying this in the context of just someone who can get on TV and explain this issue right or wrong, out of the context of whether you should vote for this candidate or not, or just saying like, this is an actual problem, this is what we actually need, as opposed to what people were willing to do.
Well, I hear what you're saying, but I respect that, but I'm talking about it from a different angle. I'm running for president. I'm not running, if all I want to do is talk about ideas, then I write a book. I'm actually talking into art, with a vision. I read a book once, and it said, with the vision, you must never compromise. But politics is the art of compromise. So I'm talking about something that I actually believe could possibly get done in our time. And
So once again, and I've noticed that, I've noticed, there's certainly, I feel, a lack of, I haven't had any black leaders who've come and endorsed my plan, and that usually seems to be the reason why it's not enough. Okay, good luck, I'm waiting for the next presidential candidate who mentions it, because there hasn't been one. When I talked about it on the presidential debate stage, it was Kamala Harris who took the topic out of my hands. And then as long as I was in the race, the press was asking presidential candidates what they thought about it. When I wasn't in the race, the conversation just goes away.
I remember that.
So, it's almost like maybe there'll be a candidate who gets on television and says it should be 20 trillion. To me, that's not in the ballpark of what, but I hear you.
And the second part of my question.
Federal
job guarantee.
I agree with you. No, I absolutely agree with you. And that would be part of my economic bill of rights.
Okay.
Absolutely. I do agree with you entirely.
Can I ask one thing on the same topic?
Yeah, this gentleman has been waiting for so long.
All right. That's interesting views.
Sorry. So this particular school, a lot of us are studying things like rotorcraft engineering.
I'm sorry, there what?
At this particular school, a lot of us are studying things like rotorcraft engineering and
Rotorcraft engineering.
like helicopters and stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
And as such, it's really hard to get a job out of college with no strings attached to the Department of Defense or some type of contractors. So what jobs did you create for students like us in your Peace Industrial Complex?
Okay. So this is the deal. We have,
Sorry.
I don't know how to put it. You're more important than uncredited capitalism. So you're saying it's difficult to get a job because the system right now is not structured in a way that there is a job for you. Most people that I talk to feel like, give me health care, give me a really good education, and I'll create my own damn career. Right? I feel that there are all kinds of ways for you to set it up. The problem is the system does not give you should have capital. It shouldn't be just like me creating. Now, I'm open to creating, just like we did during the New Deal, right? Just like we did during the New Deal. That's what you do with things like public works projects. But it should not be all of that. I would like a system where you yourself are set up with if you have the best education, and if you're not saddled by college loan debts, and you're not saddled by health care costs, and you're young and able-bodied, to me, it gives you more that you can start entering the game yourself. It's like when one man said to me, Mr. Williamson, the problem with young people today is they just don't respect capitalism. And I responded to him, well, maybe if they had some capital. The problem is not just getting a job. The problem is everything else you're saddled with. How high, how the rent costs are so high. Healthcare, all kinds, you see what I'm saying? So I want to create a system, like when I was your age, we didn't have anything. I mean, how old are you?
21.
Okay, so in the 20s, and tell me if I'm wrong, okay? We didn't have anything, but you didn't have to. Is that accurate?
My father worked in a factory. We had no health care, but there were no treatments either.
Yeah.
back then.
Well, that's an interesting point on that. It's just, it wasn't just such a struggle. So that's what I believe. Now, in addition to that, if I were president and somebody came to me and spoke to me about what you just said, that there's this whole area, these kids are coming out of schools like Georgia Tech, and they're in these fields and there aren't enough jobs, I would definitely be open. What are the kind of public-private partnerships that we could subsidize? Why are we subsidizing? We're paying billions of dollars to subsidize industries that are already making billions. We have an $88 billion medical debt, but if you put all the 5 top pharmaceutical companies from last year alone, they made 80 billion. So your tax dollars are going to subsidize them in manufacturing drugs that then they turn around and price gouge you with. So that's not where the tax subsidies should be coming, right? The tax subsidies should be going to help, and other subsidies should be going to help to generate the kinds of things that will enable you to get in the game. And I want to set you up so that once you're in the game, you're on your own. You know what I mean? That you won't need. We have to set you up to win. This is the problem I have with young people. We should treat, people say we should run the country like a business. No, we shouldn't. We should run the country like a fiscally responsible family. You set your kids up to win, and then you hold them accountable. I want you to have the best education. I don't even want to have to worry about it. I want you to have the best elementary school, middle school, high school, higher education, as high as you can go without even having to think about it. Just focus on becoming the man you want to be. And not have to worry about it. And then the quid pro quo is that you do become the man you want to be and spread your wings, which by definition will mean the creation of money. Money comes from the creativity and productivity of the American people. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, earlier you talked about restricting AI and its growth. How would you go about regulating it?
Well, I'll tell you something. First of all, we're late. President Biden just this year said we need some guardrails. People should have been on this at least 10 years ago. Now, this is the deal. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, the only way we're going to handle this, just like the only way you can really handle nuclear, and the only way you can really handle the climate, is if we, in this century, develop an entirely new paradigm of international relations. It can't be regulated unless China's part of it, and India, and Russia, and Brazil. It is now a unipolar world. It is not it's now a multipolar world. It's not a unipolar world anymore. We have to become much more humble and much more collaborative. We cannot allow competition, not only military, but a lot of people said, okay, what they said like even 50, 40 years ago, okay, we won't make it all about military competition, we'll make it about economic competition and then there won't be wars, which absolutely did not prove to be true. We have to move the paradigm at this point to collaboration. It's going to be the only way. It's going to be the only way, an entirely new paradigm of how we see other countries. Listen, with all the problems with Iran, the Iranian people are great. With all the problems with China, the Chinese people are great. So we have got to start developing the kinds of relationships with people in other countries that is far more humble, far more collaborative, far less imperialistic. Otherwise, I don't think we will, and we're going to be in big trouble, and it concerns me greatly. Yes, sir.
You have my vote tomorrow.
What?
You have my vote tomorrow.
Awesome.
I just wanted to, two things. The artificial intelligence. I find I've been a blue collar worker my entire life, and I find it a little bit hypocritical to talk about how AI is going to ruin everyone's jobs when no one is talking about limiting automation in factories. Just as a side point.
Wait, would you explain that to me? Nobody started limiting, there's something I don't understand about what you're saying.
When automation comes for the white collar jobs, it's a crisis. But when automation comes for blue collar jobs, factory jobs, warehouse jobs, nobody has a problem with that. Oh, you'll just get retrained. And I just find it a little bit hypocritical, just as a blue collar worker, to say that the AI is going to take everyone's jobs and it must be stopped. But no one said that about when robots started taking jobs from factory workers. There was never an issue with that.
When my first exposure to the topic, the first time it really was on my mental landscape that this is a real thing, was when I read Andrew Yang's book, War on Normal People, and that was in 2019, and he definitely talks about it, sir. He definitely talks about it. Now, he goes on to say, and don't kid yourself if you think that couldn't include your job if you're white collar, but in my experience, from the beginning of the conversation, I mean, everybody, little things like you go into a grocery store, and all of a sudden you're at a kiosk.
So there used to be 3 or 4 people at the checkout. And now there's only 1 person at the checkout and you're at the kiosk. And you say to yourself, well, where are the people who work those jobs? So I actually would submit to you, more people over the last, I mean, how many people in this room would say that over the last 10 years, you have become more aware and more concerned? Every time you're at a restaurant and you're using the QR code to order, I mean, a conscious person says, well, didn't there used to be more restaurant jobs? Now, is there anybody here who hasn't thought about these things? I mean, I think sometimes with Americans, it's my experience, we think people are apathetic when they're just processing. I think even where we are in this country today, I don't think the American people are the problem. When you actually talk to people, no matter where they are on the political spectrum, I don't think it's so much that people don't care or people are apathetic or even complacent. I think people just can't believe where we are. Everybody's just kind of like, nobody can believe what's happened. And so I think sometimes in your life, you're just kind of thinking things through. So maybe politicians haven't, but in my experience, I think people are.
Well, to the point about the AI and the lines at the grocery stores, when's the last time somebody said, hey, manager, why don't you hire more cashiers? And there'll be a long line for cashiers and then no line at the self-checkout, and we'll all go to the self-checkout line. Every time we volunteer to go to the self-checkout line, you're saying, I agree to the way the system
Thank you for
operates.
pointing that out to us. And that, I don't know about anybody else here, but that was meaningful for me. I'll remember that next time I'm in that situation. Now, if you just talk to the manager, that manager has no power. That comes from higher corporate and all the things we were talking about here today. Stockholder value is higher because this is the thing.
When trickle-down economics, the idea of just increasing stockholder value for the, for the stockholder, when it was first introduced in this country, Ronald Reagan's revolution, the idea was that stockholders would grow richer, but they would become job creators, and it would trickle down and lift all boats. This is an example of why it's nothing like that. Because in order to create stockholder value, their goal was never job creation, it was job elimination. You squeeze as much money as you can out of workers, and that includes, do you all remember a movie that came out a few years ago? It had George Clooney in it, I think called Up in the Air.
Yeah.
Remember those incredible scenes where he was brought in to fire people? Do you ever remember that? If you haven't seen that movie,
Professional fire.
That's the American experience. Brilliantly acted, it just punches you in the gut. Thank you for reminding us.
One last thing. I wrote a 65,000 word essay talking about like diagnosing what you're talking about.
People will wear 65,000.
I wrote a 65,000 word essay.
Oh, okay, that's a long, that's like a book, that's not an essay. Okay.
And it diagnoses what the root of everything you're talking about. And I call it manufactured suffering.
It is, that's a good title.
And it is why there's chemicals in the food so that we all get sick and we all have to go to the doctor.
Right?
It's why an orange costs more than a candy bar.
Okay,
It's the way the system operates.
okay.
It's why when we send kids to public school,
Uh-huh.
we send them to learn how to be in jail.
Right.
We don't teach anyone how to be free. And all I want to say, ma'am, is this: if you do become president, one of the things that we can do to fix all of our problems is to have a home economics program that goes from kindergarten all the way to high school, and it teaches students how to live free, how to shop, how to do their laundry, how to cook their food.
Grow food, even.
The whole 9 yards. 12 years of how to be a free American.
Now, have you gotten a publisher yet?
No, ma'am.
Have you sent it to a publisher?
No.
Well, are you going to?
Well,
So this is what you do. You go in,
Yeah,
thank you.
it does.
and in
Sorry,
the
guys.
back of acknowledgements, you'll see that the author has thanked their agent, because no publisher is going to accept a manuscript that is not represented to them. So you go into the back of the book, the acknowledgments page of the kinds of books, the kind of thing you're writing, and you start sending your manuscript to agents.
Okay.
But you gotta do that, you can't just keep it to yourself. Good luck to you.
Thank you.
Great title.
Can I,
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to say, this is true in Atlanta, Georgia, I found this out. There's a gentleman, he's a physician, a nutrition researcher physician, named Mark Hyman, and he met Bernice King at some kind of a place where he was speaking. And Bernice King was so impressed with his information about nutrition and prevention of sickness and everything, that she invited him to speak at the MLK Center. Well, a couple weeks before he was supposed to speak, he was disinvited.
Okay.
And he did a little scratching and sniffing and found out that a certain soda company in Atlanta, Georgia,
Coca-Cola.
forbid his coming. And since I found out about it, I've spoken about it to several people I know, and they say the same thing goes on in medical schools, like Harvard Medical School, Princeton. They suppress teaching nutrition to doctors. Now, I have a wonderful doctor here in Atlanta, and she said, I'm self-educated about nutrition. When I graduated from medical school, no information was given at all much about that. And that concerns me greatly, that we suppress information because these big corporate companies, and I remember hearing that about Michelle Obama when she was doing nutrition stuff, you know, talking about gardens and all that stuff. She got so much flack from General Mills and all these big corporate companies who sell cereals with colors that don't even exist in nature. And it's just, to me, so distressful that certain conditions could be treated by different nutrition, health habits, exercise, and so many things. And yet with big pharma, all you ever hear is, what, take this pill. Ask your doctor if this pill is right for you. I'm concerned, how do we stop suppression of information?
Okay. First of all, Mark Hyman
Thanks,
is my
Wesley.
friend. Mark Hyman, I've done a podcast with him. He has endorsed my campaign. He talked about how much he liked my health plan. And my health plan is called the Whole Health Plan, and I hope you'll look at Marianne2024.com and look at it. Now, in my Whole Health Plan, there is, among other things, and the whole idea, much as I said during the Democratic debates last time, we don't have a healthcare system, we have a sickness care system, okay? And so we need to do more than know how to treat sickness. We have to deal with the fact that we have the highest level of chronic illness among any advanced democracy. So my health plan proactively creates health. Now, what you just said is very true, that most people, if you go to the doctor in the United States, the chances are your doctor was educated in a Western medical institution, as fine as it might be, that is basically teaching modalities that are pharmaceutically based, okay? And they might have taken 1/2 a year of nutrition, right? They know nothing about that. I'm not. Okay, in my plan, this is how it works. You go to a doctor, and the doctor might not be a functional medicine doctor. It might be a doctor whose sole modality, as brilliant as they might be, is the pharmaceutical. In my plan, it is mandated by law that there is a database. And for any condition or sickness that the doctor might be diagnosing, we know if there is any non-pharmaceutical, non-allopathic Mark Hyman type remedy that is proven to be at least almost as efficacious. It is mandated by law, you would be informed about it, and your insurance covers that too.
You need that.
These kinds of things. And that's exactly, now, let me talk about something else. What you just said, not letting Mark Hyman speak at the King Center, that's been my entire experience of this political campaign. That's why, no, you're not gonna see me on CNN.
No.
It is unbelievable, the control of information.
Well, not yet.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Be careful with our words.
Pardon?
I just, not yet. You want
Yeah,
to-
not yet. Well, we're on this, but I'm just saying, last time in the 2020, I was on CNN's
quite a bit. I was on MSNBC, I had a CNN town hall. This time, people who were polling much lower than me, Vivek Ramaswamy, for instance, had one. When Nikki Haley and I were equal in the polls, hers was called a surge. Mine was ignored. Once again, it's not about me. I'm just saying,
No,
this
it's
is how
about
it
your
works.
policies.
They don't even want these voices out there. I heard Gabor Mate say, he said he grew up in Hungary. He said, I grew up in a very controlled society. He said, I'm telling you, in the United States today, it's even more controlled because it's so sophisticated.
Yes, and then you have something else to say.
It might be quick. I'm curious if you know how much Dean Phillips outspent you. Yeah, you beat him in pretty much every primary. So with that, and he got probably 4 times as much media coverage as you did. So the question is, are you staying in, you got 10%, you probably got 500,000 people to vote for you maybe at this point.
I haven't gotten quite that.
Okay, but you're getting there. Are you sticking around after Georgia, and where are you going to go so I can come follow you?
Next week, I'll thank you. Next
Yeah, of
week, I'll
course.
be
Be in Illinois
Cool.
and, Illinois, Democrats abroad is next. No,
Okay,
that's
yeah.
tomorrow. No,
It's a lot to keep
Illinois,
track of.
Louisiana,
Okay, I'll see you in Louisiana.
and one other. Well, you can probably see the primary schedule.
Yeah, I'll
So
look at it. I was
there's
just
one
asking you. You're here.
Illinois, Louisiana, and someplace else. Yeah, I'm just sticking around.
Cool.
I'm a mischievous type of person. I'm gonna keep talking. I'm just gonna keep talking.
I love it. I'll see you. I'm honored you remembered me too.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
New York City. So I've been covering the whole election and traveling
I wanted
around.
to ask you, as someone who works in entertainment, in the music industry, and the TV and film industry, but also very passionate about utilizing technology as a tool of empowerment, I coined a term called intertech, which is the intersection between entertainment and technology. Do you have any insights on the future of the creator economy, considering how most of Gen Z want to be creators or influencers in their workforce? The creator economy. I love that.
Yes, you had something you want to say?
Yeah, I wanted to touch back on 2 things, your earlier topic from earlier and the rotors engineering.
You know, I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay.
The mic a little bit lower.
Okay, yeah, so, the rotor engineering, we were talking about that earlier? Rotorcraft. And then we were talking about the inequality or the separation of, the economic divide. So I stand in the middle and I'm very unpopular for it. So one thing is in Dubai, they're using a drone to replace Uber. Do you think you'd want to have a world in which we had more drones so that we had more things being delivered this way, or you just want to keep building roads?
No, one of
And-
the things that they're talking about with that is going to become very dangerous to airplanes. The airplane pilots are already talking about this. You can't have just your sky filled with drones that are delivering Amazon packages and be sure that takeoffs and landings are going to be safe. You know, these things have to be, this is an example. You can't have business working like the Wild West like that. So obviously there have to be guards.
Well, I'd propose military pilots because they're already
You're
doing
a little
it.
more
But
enamored of the military
yeah.
taking over things
no,
than I am.
no, I'm just saying they're already trained, and so if we're gonna have people doing it, we should have people trained and not just some guy who came off, hey, I could get a job, I flew a drone in my backyard.
Yeah, I understand that, but still, you have to have, I mean, even now, our pilots, most of our commercial airline pilots were trained in the military. They can be very well trained, it's not their fault, there's only
Amen,
so much
Wesley.
space in the sky.
Right.
And if, so, that's all I'm saying, you can't
That's
just
fair.
say, okay, everybody, and also, you have another issue there, same thing. If it's gonna be on drones, those are jobs, we have to be very careful.
They were truck driver jobs that are now flying jobs, I guess would be,
Okay. What
My other thing is like, I understand, growing up with 2 black brothers and a white sister, I feel like I sit right in the middle of this economic divide conversation. And most of my life was spent in other parts of the world, and in the last 3 or 4 years, I've been in the South. And I've been kind of approached with, well, what do you say to millions of impoverished white Americans who feel that the take on the economic divide is cruel to them and they're suffering too? And so I just, what would someone say to them? Because how do you make them feel like now it's their money not being taken? Because they feel like they've been stepped on since the Civil War. And so that's sort of where this issue comes up, and it feels like people are like, we'll just have a second Civil War. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't sound good to me.
Well, you're absolutely correct. Poverty and nothing I said here was meant to indicate that the economic struggles of Americans is monopolized by Black Americans. You have a higher percentage of Blacks who are experiencing it, but way more whites that are experiencing it, just not, percentage-wise. When I talked about my economic Bill of Rights, when I'm talking about universal health care, that's every American. That has nothing to do with color, race, ethnicity. When I talked about subsidized childcare, tuition-free college and tech school. Now, I will tell you this business of the college loan debt does have a racial element, however, because a lot of young kids of color were told that is the way that you will close the wage gap. But at the same time, even though I'm aware of that, and even though that contributes to my feeling how important it is that we fix it, it is not just people of color who are living under the economic tyranny of that system. When I talk about a tuition-free college and tech school, paid family leave, subsidized child care, guaranteed job guarantee, guaranteed living wage, this has nothing to do with one race or another. That has to do with every American having greater economic opportunity. Listen, and that's a good way actually for us to kind of close off this today. I'll tell you, I believe we all need to come out of our silos. And we all have to remember, I see some very disturbing things in America today. I see as much smug, self-righteous arrogance on the left as I see on the right. I see far too many Americans who seem to forget nobody owns this country. We all own it, and nobody owes it to you to agree with you. Martin Luther King said you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. And I believe that when people say to me, who's your audience? Black people, white people, gay people, straight people, non-binary people, women, men, Jews, Hindus, Christians, agnostic, atheists, Muslims, enough. Enough. Those things are important. This is not to minimize the significance of any of our individual identities, and I think that there are conversations in life where it is definitely appropriate that we speak about our people. But we need to also have the larger conversation, particularly this time, that we're all Americans. I'm speaking not so much to you as this color and you as that color. I'm speaking to the American in you and the American in you and the American in you and the American in you. You know, a first principle in the United States, one of them is, out of many, one. And the many is important, but the idea is that we are many ethnicities, many religious orientations, but we are united by our fealty to these common principles. And that's why I mentioned those principles today, and that's where we're united. We're united on the level of our ideals, and on the level of our ideals, we realize it's not just about me or my people, it's about all of us. And that's given very short shrift today. You know, when I was growing up, my mother used to tell me that a woman's greatest responsibility was to her children and her home. And when my mother used to say that, I thought she was kind of uncool and retro and regressive, and she wasn't hip. The older I got, I realized the level on which she's correct. It's just that for us now, the idea that we're responsible to the children doesn't just mean our children. It has to also mean the children on the other side of town. It has to also mean the children on the other side of the world. And when it comes to taking care of our home, it can't just be my house, can't just be your house. It has to be the house we share, which is the earth itself. So I believe that we have a great task ahead of us. I think we have what it takes to do it. Winston Churchill said, you can always count on Americans to do the right thing after they have exhausted every after they have
DNC mic.
Not like Churchill.
After they have exhausted, you know what it was? It was my hearing aid. I had too close to my hearing aid. After he said, you can always
Maybe it is there. Anyway, Winston Churchill said that you could always count on Americans to do the right thing after we've exhausted every other option. Historically, we are often late to get there. But historically, even though often we're late to get there, once we do get there, we slam it like nobody's business. It's time for us to slam it like nobody's business. And you can slam it like nobody's business if you so wish tomorrow at the voting booth. If you have voted for me, please know how grateful I am. If you're going to vote for me, please know how grateful I am. And either way, if you do believe that this conversation belongs there, I hope you will get on your cell phones. I hope you'll get on your text. I hope you'll get on my social media.
200 people
I'll share
watching
it
you.
with people.
200 people are watching you.
Yeah.
Fans.
And I hope you will do what you can so that all of us know we do this. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And please sign the mailing list. Thank you.
Now he knows when to get up.
Yeah, this poor dog's been
I
better
feel a little
behaved than a lot
bad.
of children.
Thank you. I got lucky. That's why I don't think I'm gonna have a kid because the dog's so well behaved. Can't get tough.
I'm just
Yeah. Oh well, I kind of. Absolutely. He loves attention.
What's your
You can pet him. His name is Name because he had no name for a year and a half. He's getting very antsy.
You're getting antsy?
Yes, he's very happy to get some attention right now. It's a tie. Yeah, you can pet him.
Oh.
You can pet him as well. Both of you guys pet him at the same time.
getting antsy.
Yeah, he's
What is it? You hungry or something?
Oh no, he was
What
antsy,
is
meaning
it?
like he wanted attention from people. Like he didn't want to just sit
Oh,
down.
you do?
He wanted to like soak it in. Yeah, I don't even have to hold his leash. So I don't even have a leash for him.
He's your new dog. Oh my goodness. He's
May as well be.
Look at you.
He likes it. He's like, we gotta hang out.
Oh my goodness.
He doesn't want to leave you. He's loving it. I'm a little jealous.
What are you doing? Are you a good boy? What
Most of the time he's around.
are you missing again all the time? Oh my goodness. Do you even B-A-R-K? Does it bark?
No, not really. If he sees a squirrel, he'll bark. Or if he sees a cat. Thank you. Yeah, he's a weird combo.
Dog.
He is. I'm trying to figure out what he is. I got him. Yeah, I got him off the street. I was in Mexico, and so he was like 3 years ago.
Okay.
I was
so
just
he's
walking around.
It's just his personality now?
Yeah. So he just started following me. He was just like a random stray dog. He is a Mexican dog. Habla español.
Oh my goodness.
Mejor que yo. Yeah, so he just started following me, and then I went into the store, and I was like, there's no way he's waiting for me once I come out of the store. And I bought some ham, and he was just like lying down waiting for me, and I'm like, all right, I guess you're my dog.
Oh my gosh, can I get him on my TikTok?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
He's
you.
been on TikTok a few times.
Do you mind taking just
Not
a
at
quick
all.
Video? You just have to hold down on the button just for a
Absolutely,
little bit,
I got
and
you
then
covered.
When it's done, you can just
So hold it down like this.
hold it down so that it's recording while you're holding it down.
Okay, cool. Hey, say hi to your friend.
Come on down.
Hey, I can try to get him to you. Say hi to your friend.
Humans are using animals for clout.
I've used him for plenty of clout. I got my own YouTube thing as well. So like, yeah, he's the clout machine. And then I'll walk around cities with him. I travel all
Did you
around.
get some?
Yeah, I think I got a bunch. I was
Thank
holding
you.
it down the
Thank
whole
you.
time, so